Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for choosing to attend Say What, Reflecting on Microaggressions. My name is Michelle Beachy, and I will be moderating this session for you today. I invite you to please use the Q&A section for your questions, and we will leave time at the end for the presenters to address them. I will be monitoring the chat throughout the session as well. Again, you're attending Say What, Reflecting on Microaggressions, and I'm honored to introduce our presenters today. Alessandra Otero is an academic librarian with demonstrated knowledge in research services and library instruction. She is the research instructor, liaison to arts and humanities departments at SUNY Geneseo. She is an active advocate of diversity, equity, and inclusion principles. Her research interests include library instruction, arts and humanities librarianship, library outreach, values-based pedagogy, and visual literacy. Brandon West is the head of research instruction services and liaison to the anthropology and sociology departments at SUNY Geneseo's Milne Library. His research interests include examining the intersections of information literacy and online learning, applying instructional design principles to enhance student learning, and addressing the LGBTQ+ issues in libraries. Teddy Gyamfi, Milne Library Evening Access Service Manager at SUNY Geneseo, attended Binghamton University. He worked at the Glenn G. Bartle Library and later the University Downtown Center. Also, he obtained his MMLIS from the University of Southern California. Teddy's current roles include curating the course reserve collection and supervising student workers. So again, questions and answers can go in the Q&A section, and we'll have about 10 minutes at the end to have a further discussion and answer questions. And take it away, presenters.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Today, Teddy, Brandon, and I will be facilitating a conversation about microaggressions, the strategies to deal with them, and how they occur in an academic library.
So some of you who got here early have probably heard me say this a couple times now, but we have a Padlet, and I kind of want to do a pre-assessment to see where you're at. So if you want to, please go ahead and visit the link to the Padlet, which is available in the chat, and just maybe take a minute to write down any thoughts or ideas that you have. And I'll post the link again, just in case you can't see it. And when you go to the Padlet, you just double click on the image, and then you can type in a response, and then you click off of the message to post it. Alessandra, would you want to pull up the Padlet?
Sure. Here it is.
Okay, so I can see it's great. It looks like a lot of people have some prior knowledge of the topic, which is why we wanted to kind of see where people are. I see some very important. It's sad to, like, in one way, I'm glad to see like people are recognizing microaggressions. It's unfortunate that so many people have witnessed them, but that's also good. By recognizing them is usually the first step into addressing them. And I see some ideas that we'll be highlighting in our presentation. Like one person writes, our college president, when giving a presentation for her interview, was asked if she's a US citizen, and she was the only Black woman originally from Jamaica. So that importance, like it's an important idea about how we maybe intentionally or unintentionally other people and making them feel different from each other. I see one person said they've witnessed them, and she reminds, and I had to remind a colleague that she could not negate the feelings expressed by a coworker. So that's kind of an important step, is speaking out, but also this idea of invalidating people who feel like they've experienced a microaggression is a very real issue. I see, and one that's important to me is I see at our library we've had an ongoing failure among staff to use people's pronouns. That is definitely an example of a microaggression that I encounter a lot. We have certain staff around campus who use they, them pronouns, and I often end up having to correct their pronoun. When people mispronounce their pronouns, I correct them because that is a form of microaggression. And I see yes, and repeatedly done by a coworker and allowed by the library director. This is so, okay. So I think, you know, again, the point of this was just to kind of see where we're at and kind of get in that mindset of thinking about microaggressions. Again, this isn't necessarily an easy conversation to have. It's not, it might be a topic that maybe perhaps makes you feel a little uncomfortable, but that's the point of doing sessions like this, is to get us more comfortable talking about them and maybe learning a little bit more about it so that we can start doing a better job of either not committing microaggressions or recognizing them, and with the ultimate goal of being able to speak up to them. So I'm gonna, Alessandra, you can go back to the presentation and we'll continue onward. And thank you for taking a few minutes to respond to the Padlet.
So the purpose of this presentation or session is for participants to better understand how to manage and deal with microaggression in academia and the workplace. Before we start, let's watch this video of examples of workplace microaggressions.
Hi, Joe. Sorry I'm late for the call. I had a perfect morning, had to catch the last set.
You surf?
Yeah, I'm at Ocean Beach pretty much all the time. You?
Totally. We'll have to go when I'm up there next week.
Hey, I'm stoked. Epic.
Sure, sounds good.
Are you John?
Joe? Oh, yeah. Great to meet you. I totally had your picture different in my head.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but anyways, can I get you a cup of coffee?
Yeah, sure.
My hair looks crazy. It looks like a mess.
I don't believe it. Your hair always looks awesome. I mean, how do you do it? Do you twist it? Do you do it yourself?
Yeah, I twisted it myself.
Oh. I mean, do you mind?
Oh. Yeah, actually, I do mind.
Oh, sorry.
But I mean, if you're really curious about it, there are like tons of YouTube videos out now about natural hair, so maybe check that out.
There's no way we were going to make it to that date.
No. I have no idea what they were thinking. What are you doing this weekend?
Going to the beach with some buddies.
I mean, it sounds great. You've already got quite the tan. Where's your family from?
Here.
Yeah, but before here, where are they from?
Still here.
But before that?
A few generations from here.
Oh, sorry.
So, as you could see in the video, microaggressions are subtle forms of discrimination, and even when they sound like a compliment, they communicate hostility toward the targeted person or group. For example, when she commented on his skin tone, her intention was maybe to be polite and she wanted to make like a compliment about his skin, but by placing her arm beside his arm and then stressing out where he's come from and insisting about where his family actually come from, the underlying message is like, you are not from here, you are an outsider, you are different from me, And that kind of address delivers a negative message. This is the most sounding definition of microaggression. Microaggression is a brief and commonplace daily verbal, behavioral, and environmental indignity, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicates hostile, derogatory, or negative racial, gender, sexual orientation, and religious slights and insults to the target person or group. I want you to pay attention to the words intentional and unintentional. It is true that microaggressions for some people are unintentional, but that doesn't mean that they will not have a negative impact to people, to the victim, right? So it is important that when someone approaches you and said, hey, I think a comment that you made, it is a kind of microaggression because I feel like this or like that, it is important to acknowledge that even though it wasn't your intention, the message did have a negative impact to that person. So opening yourself for conversations and to listen to what other has to say, it is really important to address microaggressions. Why microaggressions are a problem? Well, understanding the context in which microaggressions occur will give us a hint of why they are a problem. To begin with, microaggression happens in the context of privilege, and privilege is built around the ideology of superiority of some group and inferiority of others. This is what we call a system of oppression, which is organized and woven into the foundation of a culture, society, and its law. Their different systems of oppressions are known as racism, sexism, ageism, and languageism, but these are not the only one. There are many others such as cisgenderism. From this system of oppression come the biases and prejudice, and microaggression manifests from those biases and prejudice, right? The common problem with microaggression is that the perpetrator doesn't realize that they commit a microaggression and doesn't acknowledge that they benefit from a privileged system. Hence, ignorance on one's privilege is not an acceptable excuse to microaggress people. The better we understand the system of privilege and the more we listen to those oppressed by it, the more you develop understanding and the better you will use your position to foster equity and harmony in your work environment. Microaggressions, since they are a form of violent communication and discrimination, has a really harsh consequences on victim mental health. It leads to elevated levels of depression, stress, and anxiety. It causes anger, avoidance, and low self-esteem. If you are in an environment or in a group where microaggression happens, this is a sign that you are in an environment that is hurtful and unfair. According to Nadal, there are different forms of microaggressions. You have the micro assaults, which are classified into verbal, behavioral, and environmental. Then you have the micro insults and micro invalidations. These two are verbal statements that will communicate discriminatory messages or undermine the realities of others. Let's see a few examples. For microassaults, a verbal microassault can be name-calling and the use of epithets. For example, calling someone fag or spick is a microassault, and actually is an intentional microassault. Nonverbal are known as behavioral discrimination. And a clear example of this kind of discrimination, you could watch it in the Netflix series Dear White People. In one of these episodes, a white fraternity house threw a party titled Dear Black People, in which white people would dress up with cultural costumes, even painting their bodies to mimics and make fun of the college Black students and organizations. Another form of microassault is the environmental microassault. And environmental microassault are offensive signs or the use of other visual displays that could be have a negative message to other people. For example, having posters that feature the Confederate symbol. I'm talking about Confederate symbols. This is a correct example of a environmental microassault. The status of the Confederates across the United States. This one is of General Robert Lee, is actually placed in Virginia. Right now, there is a debate in whether this should be removed or not. For most people of colors, these are symbols of oppression and suffering, and they should be removed. But for other people, the ones that usually are in the privileged side of the system, this is something to be proud of, something to be proud in the history of the United States. And they would reject how minorities will feel, right? So in this case, the people that wanted this status to be on and that reject how other people feel about these exhibitions are committing two types of microaggressions, which are the environmental microaggression and the microinvalidation. Environmental occur because they wanted to keep the status, right? And the microinvalidation occurs when they reject or undermine how people of color feel when they see this status displayed, okay? An example of micro-insult is when Joe Biden complimented President Barack Obama by calling him the first Black person articulated enough to be a front-runner for president, meaning that the Black people before Obama were not articulated, intelligent enough to pursue a career in politics. Another common micro-insult is when someone calls a woman in the professional context, sweetie, honey, or baby. When this happens, the person is underrating the woman and placing her at the level of a child. The person is not acknowledging the intelligence, competence, and professionalism of the female colleague. Is not seeing her in the same level. Microinvalidations, this is very subtle. It's when someone tells you that you are being oversensitive or underestimate your experience by doing or saying something. We need to be really careful with how we express ourselves. If a colleague comes to you saying that he or she have an experience with somebody that he might feel microaggressed or he felt attacked or they felt attacked, we usually tend to say, oh, don't worry, that person is like that. Don't listen to it, don't worry. Even though we are trying to show that to that person empathy and that they shouldn't be taking that situation so seriously, we are micro-invalidating their experience. So instead of aligning yourself with the perpetrator by just saying, oh, he's like that, and justify his behavior, the best we could do is listen to the person and try to have some empathy towards he or her or their experience. Another example of microinvalidation is when someone tells a poor person to pull themselves up from their bootstrap. This is easy to say when you are the privileged one in the game of privilege, but we certainly don't know people's circumstances, especially in a system that favors people with wealth and power. So telling this kind of comments to a person that, according to his or her experience, is trying hard to put herself or himself forward is not fair, and it's a way to invalidate their experiences. So now let's apply what we have learned. We are going to pop up a few situations and you will need to choose the correct form of microaggressions. Here's the first one. When a woman tells a coworker, I don't feel comfortable with this, and they replies, just loosen up. Is that a microaggression? Micro-insult or micro-invalidation? Did I get a chance to see the result for each question?
You'll get to see them once the results come in. I'll reveal them for you.
Okay, thank you.
Not a problem.
So is after all the polls are done?
Still have a couple responses trickling in. I was watching to see when it would slow down, and then I'll end the poll. So then I will reveal it.
Okay, this is my first time with a poll. That's why I'm asking so much.
Not a problem. It's first time for a lot of this for everybody. So I'm going to end it now so you'll be able to see the results for this question.
Okay, thank you. Great, yeah, this made me happy. You really get it. Yes, it is a micro-invalidation. The person is just aligned with the perpetrator, and it is not having empathy toward the person that doesn't feel comfortable with what the other coworker did. Oh, thank you. Next one, please. When a person of color is being ignored at the store counter as attention is given to the white customer behind them. This one can be tricky. I knew this would happen. It could be a micro insult, but it's actually a micro assault because the form of the microaggression is behavioral. The person is not paying attention to that customer. Is not saying something. Is behaving in a way that is ignoring the person of color. Okay. Next one, please. When a cisgender television personality, Katie Couric, asked transgender actress Laverne Cox and transgender mother Carmen Carrera about their genitals on national television. Correct, micro insult. Great, last one, please. When I hear the dean of the library unabashedly referring to Black Americans as delinquents. most of the people thought this is a micro assault. It's actually micro insult. And here, even though the Black Americans are not present in the situation, the witness didn't feel comfortable with the comment. So it's a micro insult because it's a verbal thing. And I wanted to bring this one up because microaggressions, the victim doesn't have to be present in order for a comment to be a microaggression. You can witness a microaggression just by talking to a friend, and if the friend expresses himself in a way that you feel is not fair for a minority or group of people, you can address that situation and educate the person by telling them this is a microaggression. Okay. So this is the end of our poll. Now I'm gonna leave you with Brandon West. So he's going to talk about microaggressions in the academic library.
Okay, hi everyone. So the first part of this presentation was just to kind of orient you to some of the key terminologies and concepts. And I did a little bit of research into like more specifically the academic library context, since this is SUNYLA, and I'm sure we're all curious about that. Can you proceed? So one thing about academic libraries is we're not exempt from this idea of microaggressions. And if you were did the Padlet at the very beginning, you could see we all have, many of us have experiences within our own libraries. And I just wanted to kind of mention, like, there's no particular place that microaggressions happen. They happen between colleagues, they happen between librarians and students, between students and students, and they can happen everywhere. In our library, they're more likely to happen at places like service points, whether that's the reference desk or a circulation desk. They can also happen, in study areas. I, have overheard students making microaggressive comments about, groups of people before. So I just want to kind of stress that it doesn't have to be a certain situation, but these happen anywhere, anytime. And like Alessandra pointed out in the last poll question, it can happen just in a conversation without anybody there. And so it's really a much bigger and pervasive problem than what we probably think, because it's not just like, oh, I have to be a person of color or a person with some other marginalized group to experience this. So I turned to the literature to see what was specifically being said about microaggressions in academic libraries. And surprisingly, there's not like an overwhelming amount of research. A lot of it is kind of anecdotal, and it's mentioned a lot, and there's a lot of research on microaggressions themselves, just not in the context of academic libraries. But I did find this one study by Alibi in 2015, and they surveyed academic librarians, and they just found out that the minority participants both experienced and observed racial microaggressions more often than the non-minority respondents. And through their analysis, the pattern was that non-minority academic librarians do not recognize racial microaggressions that their minority colleagues might be experiencing. And so I think that was just again, this was kind of, not the most scientific study because it was just a quick survey, but it does show a point that's highlighted in a lot of other research regarding microaggressions. And if you look up research by Daryl Wing Su, he's one of the prominent voices in this area. It kind of reaffirms what he has found, which is when you are a person in a marginalized group, you're more likely to recognize those than if you're not. And that's a big problem considering that our profession is overwhelmingly white. And that's something, we're all aware of. And we'll talk about that a little bit more on the next slide. So in the library, why these are a particular problem for us as librarians, the first kind of perspective I'm going to talk about is as a librarian and being a library worker. So in general, being in an environment where microaggressions happen and they're not addressed or acknowledged, or I get invalidated, creates a hostile work environment. And this hostile work environment can make a person feel frustrated, isolated, anxious. It makes them feel othered, like they don't belong. And it can lead to burnout. And this really stems from the lack of support you might have. So like if I go to my director and I said, you know, somebody said that, you know, all gay people are going to burn in hell. As, you know, I say this as a member of the LGBTQ community. How is that going to make me feel safe or supported? And going back to the Padlet again, people put some pretty traumatizing experiences in there. There's often like a power dynamic too. And that's something I've heard a lot is, well, I can't see anything because I don't have tenure. And, that's, not a healthy way to proceed. And so, and not only that, especially people who are, they do have a different, who are identify as a minority of some sort, or outwardly, like their skin color is different, or I should say that their skin color is something other than white, or they're outwardly presenting something outside of traditional gender norms. They're more likely to be on the receiving end of those verbal exchanges. Also in our library, people from marginalized groups are more likely to be deliberately excluded from certain activities, whether that's conscious or unconscious on the behalf of certain people. And this also precludes them from a lot of advancement opportunities. So ultimately, I would say probably most of you are in the session today because you probably have an awareness or care about the topic of not just microaggression. This is really just a one subtopic under anti-racism, really, I think we'd probably all agree that diversity and inclusion is important. And probably all of you have a chief diversity officer, or there's some type of diversity initiative, and that's great. And, it's a starting point. However, this actually, having a microaggressive environment continues to inhibit true diversification though, because a lot of our efforts in academia, in academic libraries, tends to be on the recruitment of people who are diverse, but not on the retention. And this maintains that over what the status quo of our overwhelmingly white profession. One of the statistics I read was saying 80% of librarians are white. But if that makes sense, because if people are burning out because they go into these academic environments where it's, well, we've always done it this way. Or, especially in libraries where librarians have faculty status, there's a lot of whiteness around this idea of being faculty and what it means to perform in a certain way. And oftentimes, I have seen it where people aren't, performing whiteness. They are viewed as not being as productive. And this is highly problematic. And so I think personally, before we start talking about diversifying the actual workforce by recruiting people, we need to really talking about how are we going to increase our cultural competencies in the library and promote true inclusion. And if you can't answer that, or you don't want to do the work, I don't know what the point of trying to say, well, we do all this diversity, inclusion, recruitment, because the people aren't going to stay there because there's those big underlying issues. So this kind of also rolls over, that's kind of the employee side of it. But then there's also patrons from marginalized groups feeling like they don't belong. And so I'm going to go into a couple examples of that. So an article that I read, and this is in our references, and it's freely available on Project Muse, is an article by Brooke Ellenwood and Lazaro. And their article is about denaturalizing the whiteness in an academic library. And of course, you know, naturally we're talking about race, where microaggressions stems from that. So one kind of problem they brought up in a service area that we probably don't, and I said that many white librarians probably haven't thought about before, is this idea of like how we're supposed to be neutral. You know, we don't judge people on what they read or what information they need, and that's true. And we don't want to make assumptions. However, next bullet, please. This kind of mentality of wanting to remain neutral kind of backfires in the long run. Because while you probably shouldn't be commenting on what information you're giving them, by not acknowledging that these differences exist, and by saying, oh, well, you're gonna ignore any assumptions that are out there, library work is actually at a greater risk of committing microaggressions, because we're not educating ourselves. We're not being culturally competent, because we're like, well, I'm neutral, I treat everybody equally. Well, that's great, but there's not an level equal playing ground for everybody out there. And while it might be easy for us to sit at a reference desk and say, well, I'm gonna be equal to all, I treat everybody the same, that is a micro invalidation into itself, because you're not accepting that other people don't have, you know, this white privileged experience. And you can hit the next bullet. And so the only really work we can do to kind of counteract this and work towards increasing, it's not like you have to be afraid, like if you know, microaggressions happen, but what you have to do is put in the time to try to educate yourself. And we have to try to do this by first identifying like that there is an issue, and then working towards being culturally responsive and trying to identify racist practices that happen. And again, this is hard to do, and it requires a lot of education. It doesn't happen overnight. So Alessandra talked a little bit about environmental microaggressions. And so that's the overrepresentation of one culture in library spaces to the exclusion of others. And so one thing written in the article from the previous slide was talking about how academia in general is built on, you know, white ideology. If you really look at how institutions are formed, you know, everything from just like, look how buildings are designed. Often it's a bunch of white, you know, faculty or administrators making decisions about what students want, you know, students from a diverse population. Next bullet, please. A lot of the decisions in the library, when we're talking about a library being overwhelmingly white, and so all these white workers have decision-making power over the spaces, like where you put furniture, what kind of artwork do you put up? And this leads to creating what's called a monocultural space. So it represents whiteness and white values. And one thing I think of, like in Milne Library at Geneseo, right outside where the librarian's office is this wall of all these pictures of old white men who, yes, they're distinguished faculty members, and they, you know, obviously did great work in order to get that distinguished. But from another perspective, if I'm a person of color coming into the library and the only artwork I see in the area is a wall of old white men, what is that articulating to me? Do I feel valued? Is it saying the only way you can be successful is to being a white man with a PhD? And so it's just kind of a subtle thing, but it's probably something many of us haven't really thought about, but we really need to start putting in the work to doing that. And really the best way to kind of address these environmental microaggressions is to really try to learn about the ideal learning environments for our marginalized students, and inviting diverse perspectives into our planning processes. A lot of times our decisions are being made by white librarians in a white echo chamber. But more importantly, not only just listen to these people and try to get their perspective, but actually try to actually implement some of those ideas. a lot of times, I've been in the SUNY system for 7 years now, and I can't tell you how many times I've been on committees where it's like, well, we want students' perspectives, and then we get the student perspective, then it's like, well, we can't do that. Well, we can't do that. Well, we can't do that. And it's like, well, we probably could. And, one of the problems of why microaggressions are perpetrated is nobody wants to do anything about it or says we can't. And the thing is, we have to be active in that process. So Teddy will be taking off from here, kind of talking about what we can do. But I wanted to kind of leave you off on this quote that I really like, that I think sums up this well. But when we remain silent while witnessing a microaggression, we become complicit in that action. And so this is one of the things about educating ourselves. The more you know, you're not exonerated anymore from saying, well, I wasn't aware. Because again, we can't use our privilege as an excuse if we're going to actually make a change in the long run.
Thank you, Brandon, and thank you, Alessandra, and thank you all for attending once again. Now that we have reflected on microaggression academic libraries, how do we address and respond to it? First, let's acknowledge that microaggression does and still exists. As Alessandra mentioned earlier, and based on your Padlet responses, microaggression can happen in different ways, shapes, or forms. In terms of addressing microaggression, let's use our resources within our academic libraries. In our next slide, we'll look at ways to respond to microaggression. Let's encourage, engage, and share educational resources, such as creating pamphlets, recommending books or journal articles where patrons can view or have access to them on our library website or through a public bookcase display. Educate
Hello, we do still have sound. We just lost our speaking panelists. They have dropped out of the session, it looks like. Give us one moment with apologies.
How about while we wait to see if Teddy comes back, does anybody have any questions that Alessandra and I could try answering for you?
Mm-hmm. So we have a question here in the chat. How do you educate your workforce in a holistic way so that everyone receives this without a feeling like something forced that won't create fundamental change?
Well, I will give my 2 cents on that. I'm not I like to think of myself as I am a dedicated learner, and I don't feel like I have like a master expertise in this, but I would say that I don't know if there is a way that you can do something that's going to make everybody happy. And I just say that as again, having worked in libraries, for academic libraries in SUNY for the past 7 years, I don't think I've ever seen a group of faculty librarians agree on one thing 100%. And with this, there's a lot of unlearning that has to be done when we're talking about race or any type of marginalized group, because people are going to have different opinions. And I think that's why, you've probably heard of the book White Fragility. Why that's so popular is people have to first accept the fact that, they have privilege. And probably many of you understand that their privilege exists, but for some people there isn't. And so I think all you can really do, and I think the approach we're taking at Geneseo, is just making any efforts. We have to stop thinking okay, we're going to have one solution that's going to fix everything and everybody's going to be on board, because they never will be. But if we don't do anything, that's also not doing any good either. So I say find a group of like-minded people and start there. Read a book, at Geneseo in Research and Instruction Services, we're reading a book. Well, we're in the process of picking out our book, but we're going to do a book club internally to just educate ourselves more. Mm-hmm. We've also worked with the diversity officer to have workshops, and they're optional. Not everybody attends. And I could probably tell you who would attend and who wouldn't, but that's fine, because the thing is, this is such a complex issue. If we don't do anything, we're never going to get any traction moving forward. But it's kind of like a herd mentality thing. The more people we can increase their awareness, the better off we're all going to be. And I'm not going to worry about the one person who might be blatantly racist and try to cater to that. It also doesn't mean I have to put up with their racist or homophobic or sexist ideology. Mm-hmm. I have had to put up with that in libraries before. I won't name names. And but the thing is, it's we don't, frankly, I know one of the concerns I hear from newer faculty is, well, I'm on tenure track. I'm well, if you don't feel comfortable going to your director, dean, or chair, then go to HR. It doesn't matter. The problem is people aren't reporting this. And I know we don't always have a supportive environment, but I think, I'll get off my soapbox, but basically I think you just have to start someplace, even if it's with one other person, in order to make that change happen. And we have to stop thinking well, everybody's going to be on board. And, you could do things with have a retreat where that is a part of the conversation. But I also think you need to have people who know how to talk about this in a way, with a group of people who are kind of all over the board. And so that's why at times we've brought in our chief diversity officer to kind of assist us with those types of conversations.
We have other questions here. When you find yourself sticking your foot in your mouth, as I've done many times, what is the best way to make the other person feel better? I find myself sometimes trying to give someone a legitimate compliment and then see that my words came out wrong. I can pick up that one if you like, Brandon.
I'm back, actually. My internet went out, so sorry about that.
Okay, so should I answer this one and then we move forward?
Yeah, how about you go ahead and do that?
Yeah, so I'm gonna answer this question to Brady Cross. It's simple. When you find out that you did something wrong or that your words came out wrong, just apologize and give yourself the chance to talk to that person, invite that person for a coffee, and to have an open conversations about how you feel about it and how that person felt about it. So make that a learning experience instead of getting shy or afraid to approach that person. Just learn about it and be open to the opportunity that has been presented to you. Most of the people like when people, not that like, but it is a good sign when someone apologizes and open themselves for conversation. And people usually respond to that good conversation. And when they see interest from the other part that they really wanted to learn and to know what happened that was misinterpreted, usually you get good responses. So now I'm turning back to, thank you for those questions. We are gonna have a session for questions later, and let's go back to Teddy.
Thank you, Alessandra, and I apologize once again. I had technical difficulties. So back to the presentation. As I mentioned previously, some of the educational resources that we have at our library can be used on auspicious events such as Black History Month, Pride Month, Women's History Month, Hispanic Heritage Month, and Mental Health Awareness Month. Another way to address microaggression is hosting events at your library and or on campus. This may include inviting guest speakers within your campus community or anyone familiar with microaggression. Another way of hosting events is collaborating between your libraries and or with students, staff, faculty, and community borrower users. This can be in the form of town hall meetings, forums, summits, conferences, and even educational modules. The intent is to promote and have a positive discussion and dialogue. On to the next slide. Another way of addressing to microaggression is moving on neutralizing biases. Similar to educational resources, providing or sharing online content where patrons can learn and better educate themselves. Massive open online courses such as LinkedIn Learning, Khan Academy, edX all have a number of classes and courses on exclusiveness and diversity. To take it a step further, reach out to your fellow university colleagues, whether on campus committees or campus departments, who share similar interests in bringing change and fostering a more friendly environment. These allies can bring change in areas the library or university may or tend to overlook or even avoid, such as increasing the diversity pool for candidates in the hiring process and addressing racism, oppression, power and privilege on campus, as Brandon had mentioned earlier. Try to set realistic expectations and goals for those conversations. Do not expect immediate change. Look to work together to find strategies in a more productive and respectful way. Interactive technology such as social media is also essential when posting and sharing content regarding microaggression. Posting educational resources, as mentioned previously, finding similar content to those available at your library can also include a list of movie titles. All are ways to improve social interaction with your library patrons and followers. On to the next slide. Let's see how we can better respond to microaggression in our academic libraries. When addressing microaggression, who should we work with? Brandon mentioned marginalized groups are impacted the most, but who can help you address it? Student groups related or connected to African American students, LGBTQ+ student groups, Latinx student groups, and even fraternities and sororities, just a few of many groups in your campuses. Another population to reach out in your community is small business owners, nonprofits, local, regional, and even nationwide known companies and organizations. Another way of responding to microaggression is having training sessions. This is an effective way to respond to microaggression. Finding ways to keep both yourself and staff updated with current terminology and creating awareness to foster an inclusive work environment to ensure the best services among staff and for patrons. Safe zone training, cognito, and mental health first aid are just several examples of the ample training resources library staff can partake in. Making your library a safe space or safe haven to help foster a healthy environment for all. In times like the ones we're in now, having uncomfortable dialogue can be tough. In our next slide, we'll look at how to navigate them. Some ways to navigate through microaggression is to drop the defensiveness. The most productive response in the workplace is actually to confront the microaggressor. Sometimes using humor can help diffuse a situation if needed. If someone offends you, listen. Identify their feelings and hurt. Think before you speak. as well as be willing to learn and seek out additional information during your spare time to learn about current and historical behaviors and policies. Please be aware, it also helps to approach another staff member, ally, or supervisor privately and explain what's going on as they may not have noticed should an incident occur. In our next slide, we'll look at how to better address and respond to microaggression. Seeking out targeted groups, as mentioned earlier, and dealing with those affected by microaggression allows libraries to better understand their issues and struggles. This list also includes international students and those dealing with with mental health issues. Studies have shown harmful impacts linked to microaggression, which includes anxiety, lack of confidence, loss of drive, depression, and helplessness. Use your library as an advocate for campus resources, bridge the gap between campus and the patrons with mental health services and academic support across your campuses. Some other questions to ask yourself before making any remarks, comments, or opinions are, what does this person have to consider in their day-to-day life because of oppression? Is what I'm doing or saying reinforcing that oppression? And what did I mean with what I said? Say what you mean what you say. And to conclude this portion of responding to microaggression, let's look at ways of how to avoid confrontation. Do not fight or indulge in any sort of back and forth. Rather take a different approach with the recommendations provided. To do this, be sure to consider making the invisible visible, educate the perpetrator, and disarm the microaggression. Have empathy to those affected, and please do your homework. Before we proceed to our case study, let's remember, microaggression adds up and will wear you out. Let's continue to address the elephant in the room every chance we get. Microaggression happens often and are sometimes hard to notice. Think about how the person you're referring to will feel. Now moving along, let's take a look at our case study example.
Hey, Teddy, I think we're gonna probably have to skip over it because we're almost at the end time for the presentation.
All right.
So if we wanna just forward to the what you can do slide, yeah.
Okay, so what you can do to work with microaggressions and be effective in dealing with it. First, you need to educate yourself, and I think we all are in the same page right now because we just, by participating in this session, you are educating yourself, right? So let's make an applause for us. Great. Another thing you need to do is get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Sometimes we just need to open ourselves in order to bring conversations to the table. As the previous question we answered before, what do you do when you say something came out the wrong way? Well, open yourself to be uncomfortable and just have these conversations. It will help you understand people's perspectives, people's point of view, and you will also learn that you are not the only one that makes mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. And in this case of microaggressions, we are gonna be sometimes witnesses, sometimes we are gonna be perpetrators, or sometimes we are gonna be the victims. It's just, it will depend on the situation and the message that will be addressed. Being silent is not the solution to the problem. We need to talk about this. And as Brandon mentioned before, it's not only talk about this, but do something about it. And gathering groups, finding allies, finding people. If you don't find people within the library that wants to talk about these issues, well, go to other departments, go outside the library and find that people that might be interested in these topics to find out solutions on how to deal with microaggressions in your work environment. Also, work towards to be an active ally. We need to take any form of actions. Just watching a movie or a TV series, or just reading an article, short article about allyship or or whatever is going on right now and discuss that issue is something active that you are doing in order to start dealing with this situation. Just keeping our eyes shut will not solve the problem, will not address us. And well, let's just see our situation right now. All these protests that have arisen is because the majority have been ignoring a situation that is happening and they don't want to do anything. So I think the beginning is educating ourselves and talking about it and doing small steps in order to start making changes. And finally, we put up this resource guide for you. Oh, I have the Q&A questions here. Okay, resource guides for you with the definition of microaggressions, types of the microaggressions. But I want you to pay attention to the pages here. We have added one about anti-racism because microaggression is just a small portion of the big picture of racism and system of operations. And here you will have articles from ACRL and ALA about that topic, postcards to follow, social media to support, a list of TV series and films you can watch either by yourself or in groups in the library. You can make a film club or a book club about this topic. And here you will have articles about microaggressions. These are available online. And one more thing. Yeah, of course, we are not gonna send you home without resources about how to deal with microaggression and strategies of how to deal with microaggressions. So here you have a guide to responding to microaggressions and the tool to recognize microaggressions. So thank you very much for attending this session. If you have any questions, this is the time for questions. I think I cannot see the Q&A, but maybe in the chat.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Alessandra, it's Michelle. I can't see any of the questions that are in the Q&A, so.
There are three in the Q&A. Would you like me to copy and paste them into the chat?
Yeah, if you want to do that, that would be great, and then I'll read through them. 1 second. Thank you.
Alessandra and Teddy, I need to actually go. I'm facilitating a special interest group right now.
Okay.
You can take over from here.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Brandon. Bye-bye.
Bye, Brandon.
Bye.
Okay, so we have a question from Jennifer. Has the microaggression discussion / literature included the use of examples in education and training? I'm a trainer, and one of the things I've tried to do is eliminate unintentionally biased examples I'm using during workshops. For instance, saying something is like driving a car assumes the privilege of having learned to drive a car, or using house as a descriptor assumes people living in houses.
So the resources we have about microaggressions and in regards of the strategies are targeted toward general communication skills rather than these specifics in training. But I mean, since we are using language to communicate, I think they apply to addressing trainings in these kind of topics. Teddy, do you have something to add to that?
No, I think it's when it comes to discussing microaggression, it's really about having an open discussion between those who are affected and those who may not see how microaggression can impact others. There are resources available. If you look at our LibGuide, the videos, the content that we share, it's sort of the starting point in having a positive dialogue. Obviously, we don't have the answers or the solutions to it, but at least having that sort of discussion, you can see how others may be targeted or how others may feel in certain situations or just in certain scenarios.
Okay, our next question, how do you address microaggressions with students since you are not on an equal footing with them. As a library staff member, you might be seen as an authority figure.
I'll answer this question. So I mainly work with student workers, and I recently attended a safe zone training through our Chief Diversity Officer, SUNYLA. And one thing I learned from it was, the current terminology. Over the past 5 to 10 years, we've seen a lot of changes in regards to how we address one another using pronouns and just gender and other means. And I think if you can either create a training or find a training online or any training provided by your campus, that would be a good way to incorporate students into better learning, and even giving them some sort of practice scenarios about how to address patrons, how to address staff, how to address faculty will be a good idea. So I recommend a safe zone training if possible.
Okay, our next question is, what should you do if your concerns about addressing microaggressions that has been impacting you is not addressed and keeps being ignored?
I'll answer this as well. So in one of our presentations, we had discussed, talking to allies. We all have either co-workers, friends, acquaintances within the campus community. I've always felt comfortable talking to my supervisor about issues I've dealt with on campus, but even talking to the interim director or just other staff members. And I think it's really about just having that dialogue. You're not going to always have everyone on your side, but for those you're close with or those who can help you find the right individuals to address the matter to, that's what's important. And that's what's key in addressing microaggression. It's not really about talking to everyone about it and getting both the bad and the good responses from it, but talking to those who can help you find the right means to addressing it. Because sometimes we can also address microaggression outside the workplace and attend other events that may help us look at things differently, that can help bring it to the workplace and help and address those issues.
Yeah, I agree with Teddy. And also, if you're addressing this, I don't know, I don't have more information about the situation, but if you're addressing the situation with the same person and nothing is happening, well, it is good you change and look for another ally to talk about this situation and think and see how they can work, how you can work with that person in a way that you start to see changes in your work environment.
And someone just made a comment saying it is challenging having those conversations at the workplace.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, it is.
It is. It's not comfortable at all. Mm-hmm. It's really uncomfortable. You are gonna feel vulnerable. Sometimes you're gonna feel that you're being attacked as well. And it requires a lot of courage. But I think that if we accept the challenge, we can go through. Of course, you need to be have some kind of lucky, because if you have people that are willing to do that with you, I mean, you won't feel alone. And that's the problem. I think sometimes people doesn't want to be willing to do that.
Right. And also starting on a smaller scale, I don't know how some of you guys may communicate at your workplace, but having your staff meetings, having your interdepartmental meetings, that could be a good way to ignite the conversation. And then from there, if you have to go on a larger scale, talking to administration, talking to, the history department, or having to address it with a student group. These are all ways to promote the dialogue and have these positive conversations to come to the end goal. We don't want to have a situation where we're going to have people bash you and ridicule you for standing up for yourself as well for others. So you try to find ways to address the issue on a smaller scale, but with hopes that as time goes on, because this will not happen in a short time frame, this will take time, but having those conversations can go a long way.
Yeah, another thing I want to add, also don't feel pressured. I know during the whole session we've been saying that we cannot be passive. We need to be active and we need to do something, but also you need to find a balance of between not pushing yourself too hard. Or sometimes you just need to do some step back, breathe, and then continue, you know, because these conversations are challenging and sometimes you can burn out easily. So it is good also to be honest with yourself. So right now I cannot have this conversation, but maybe later I can talk to you about this and I will reflect on it. That kind of phrases I'm using right now are in the articles of how to deal with microaggressions in the research guide.
Okay, it looks like those were all the questions that were in the Q&A. So I think we probably can wrap up our session, and thank you to our panelists, Teddy, Alessandra, and Brandon. And I hope everyone enjoys the rest of the conference.
Thank you very much.
Thank you once again, and have a great day, everyone.
Have a great day, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.